they want. So far, no one's come in yet, but we still have, oh, we're early, so.
Yeah, and will we be able to see people?
No, you won't be able to see anybody. So,
Okay.
but if you open up the participants, you should be able to see the list of everybody, attendees and panelists. Okay, there we go. Now we're recording. So we are recording the session. Again, I'm Franklin Escobedo. I'm the library director for the Larkspur Library. And I want to thank you all for joining us this weekend for part of our Garden Talk series. Today, we're really excited. We have author Fay Mark, who writes for the Marin IJ, as well as she's a Master Gardener as well. And then we have Joe Jennings, who will be leading the interview today, who's also a UC Master Gardener for Marin, and the president of the foundation, of the Commons Foundation for the Larkspur Library. So I'll hand it off to you, Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Jennings. I want to welcome you all here on a kind of a cool Saturday after interesting weather week. We have Fay Mark of Marin Master Gardeners who's here today. She's the Marin IJ Garden Section author of today's article. Spring is a good time to get ready for fire season. And we are so thrilled. This is our first author interview for our gardening class on 11 o'clock on Saturdays. So we anticipate having more classes this summer, and in addition, interviewing more Marin IJ authors and other authors about interesting and important topics in the garden. We're so glad you're all here. If you have questions, please put them in the chat to Franklin, and we'll answer them when we get towards the end. So Fay, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for coming. And before we start, could you just give people a little sense of your background?
Sure. Hi, Joe. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to chat with you today about Fire Smart Landscaping. So I enjoyed a corporate marketing career in high tech in Silicon Valley with Fortune 500 and startup companies. And when I retired, I moved to Marin County and then spent 5 years sailing from the east coast of the United States to the west coast via the Panama Canal.
So okay, that's a whole nother story, possibly another great interview, but how did you get involved with Master Gardeners, and what is Master Gardeners?
Well, in a less than formal response, Master Gardeners are trained by the horticultural arm of the University of California, and we volunteer to educate home gardeners on gardening best practices. So when we came back from sailing, I knew that I wanted to find a way to give back to the community. And so I started to explore various volunteer opportunities, and one of the opportunities presented itself actually in a Marin IJ article, and that was about becoming a Master Gardener. And I always enjoyed gardening as a hobby, and I even did it on the boat. And so as I learned more about the Master Gardening program, I learned that I could gain a more formal education in the horticultural aspects of gardening. And so I combined that interest with my interest in being a volunteer and giving back to the community, and here I am.
Well, you have a very interesting article today on Fire Smart Landscaping. And if for the viewers who haven't yet read the IJ this morning, can you first start by just explaining what is Fire Smart Landscaping for us?
Sure. It's a really good question, and I see it as more of an educational program to help homeowners learn how to maintain their property by moving or eliminating things on their property that could ignite during an ember storm brought on by wildland fire. But it's also an education on how we can care for the plants on our property so they thrive and remain healthy.
So I noticed in the article that you kind of detailed the top risks for homeowner safety and property in the garden. what are those risks, Fay?
I think one of the biggest risks are overgrown plants that are under windows or near doors. If they catch on fire, you may not be able to exit your home, and the heat intensity of the flame could also break a window, allowing the fire to enter your home. So same thing with large trees or shrubs near the street or along your driveway. Fire officials may not be able to access your home if those plants are on fire. Another significant risk is anything that can burn within the first 5 feet of your home or structure, which includes decks. I think we all know that all plants can burn, but a greater risk are those that are unhealthy, any kind of dry plant litter, especially in gutters and on your roof. Things that we probably wouldn't think about very much, like wood planter boxes in the front of windows, or dead or dry plant material on the property, like leaves and branches and wood mulch that hasn't been cleared away. So, you know, what happens is that windborne embers can travel miles ahead of a wildland fire and then land on those materials and ignite them. So when you walk around your house, look closely at where the dead material collects, and it's collecting there because of the wind. So, you know, during a wildfire, that's where the embers will likely land.
And this is a great morning to do that because we had quite a bit of wind in the last 24 hours. So I, just before the meeting, walked around our yard, and you were right. On the patio, there's a corner that has a bunch of leaves in it. In another part of the house, they're underneath a little ledge. And I know that I cleaned those out a week ago. So this brings me to the key, those who don't like to do yard maintenance that much. How often should we be doing this, Fay?
Well, that's kind of a lifestyle question, but I have actually low litter plants because I don't like to do maintenance that much myself. But, you know, ideally we'd be doing it as much as possible, and not just at certain times of the year, but throughout the year. But especially during those extended hot and dry periods that are accompanied by winds, you know, in the July, August, September, sometimes October months of the year. So that's the time when you really want to be vigilant about removing those dead, dry materials from the property. So like you said, you know, for example, today's a great day to go out and weed. We just had rain, or at least I did here in Sausalito. In fact, it hailed last night. So the soil is moist and it's easy to dig into to remove those roots at the root level, sorry, the weeds at the root level. And it's a great way actually to go out and get some exercise.
So Fay, it looked like in the article you had debris removal, and then you had weeding, and then you had pruning as the three sort of ongoing things. Is that right?
Yes, those are the basics.
Right. And so, and then in addition, keeping everything 5 feet away from the house. So it's curious to me, does this mean that we're going to be removing debris to the soil level, or do you want us to leave the mulch? How, when you say remove, how far do we need to go in cleaning up?
So the rule of thumb is keep the first 5 feet around any structure on your property free and clear of plant debris. There's always the it depends, you know, with gardening. So I'll always continue to emphasize that the debris really needs to be cleared from your roof and your rain gutters. And then on the ground, you want to make sure that you pull mulch away from that first 5 feet of your property. The wood mulch is fine beyond that, as long as it's the larger size mulch. And then mulch is an important component of keeping soil so it can retain water and it remains healthy. So you can, within the first 5 feet of the property, you can use non-combustible mulch like pea gravel or decorative stones, pavers. I actually use boulders and a compost within the first 5 feet of my home because I have succulents. And but beyond that first 5 feet, you can use, like I said, the larger mulch chunks, but you don't want to layer them more than a couple of inches thick, because embers, if they were to land in that, they could smolder in thicker layers of mulch.
And then I noticed on the Fire Smart section of the Marin Master Gardener website, there are kinds of mulch as small. For example, gorilla hair, the fine shaved Western red cedar mulch, which is highly flammable. Now, is that correct?
Yes. I know that people like to use that in sloped areas of their property because it tends to stay in place. But it's a fire hazard. So you really, we would recommend that you dig it into the existing soil and then top it with a larger mulch that is more fire safe beyond that 5 foot zone.
So in the 5 foot zone, when you say nothing combustible, what do you really mean there?
Well, mulch, for example, wood mulch is highly combustible. So we prefer that you keep that away. Nothing combustible is, any plant can burn. So if you want to have plants in that 5 foot zone, you want to make sure that they're extraordinarily well maintained in terms of their size. You want to surround them with non-combustible materials such as, like I said, gravel, pea mulch, or pea gravel. You really want to try to move your pathways closer to your home and keep your plants outside of that 5 foot zone. So, you could have stone pavers, for example, and then, you could have the pea gravel and then start your garden.
So it sounds like, to a certain degree, you need to rethink how your landscaping is laid out. Because when I watched the video that we'll be showing later and also on your website, there's some subtleties about, stone pathways create fire breaks and this protecting around the house. This can be a multi-stage project, I guess is the way to look at it. You're doing the maintenance now, but what you're really trying to do is get people thinking about this for their property. Is that right? Yeah.
So, planning, I know when the weather gets nice, we're all really excited about going to the nursery and, things are in bloom and you want to bring them home and plant them. But you really want to spend time and understand the climate on your property. Where are the sunny spots? Where are the shady spots? You want to think about the soil conditions and the level of water that you can provide. And then as you understand that more, then you can start to think about what are the right plants that will survive to the best of their ability in those particular locations. You really want to focus on providing a healthy environment for your plant, because if the environment is healthy, the plant will be healthy, and that minimizes the risk of that plant actually catching on fire.
So we are always in a perpetual war with weeds where we live in Larkspur. And you emphasize in your article that right now is the time to get weeds out of the yard. Do you want to expand on that a bit?
Well, I'll tell you, Joe, if there were a plant Olympics, the weeds would be the gold medal winners. The weeds, can be any type of plant or flower that are growing where they really aren't wanted or desired. And so if left to their own devices, they will produce seeds, and those seeds will fly all over the place, germinate, and continue to spread, and can become quite invasive. Again, as we get into those longer weeks and months of hot, dry conditions, those weeds often will dry out and can actually become a fire hazard in and of themselves.
So then, should we compost weeds from our yard or get them out?
If the weed has already gone to seed, it depends on if you're composting yourself or if you're composting through green waste. If you're composting yourself, you want to remove the flower. You want to minimize the chance for those seeds to get into your compost and continue to germinate. If you are composting through green waste, yeah, you can throw the entire weed into the green waste, because once it goes to green waste, the facilities, their composting methods create a level of heat that kills the roots and the plant and the seeds, and so that's an appropriate way to eliminate them as well.
Well, good. I am still removing the ivy that someone planted on this property, who knows how many years ago. The relentless English ivy that we can't seem to get rid of.
Yeah.
Now, about pruning, your article talks quite a bit about the importance of seasonal pruning. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. Well, what I do is I always have my sharpened hand pruners when I go outside to do my maintenance, whether my intention is just to pull weeds, because there are always the opportunities to trim away dead debris from plants. And so I start at the eye level, and I look at the ground. I look at my low growing plants, and I look at the plants that are at high level, and I prune away dead debris, and I do this throughout the year because there is no risk to the plant by doing that. I also thin my plants throughout the year so that I can see and remove any dead debris that collects in the center of that plant. And then for taller plants on my property, I use pruning loppers, and it's on an extension pole.
Right.
And the reason I do this is because I always am looking at the horizontal and vertical spaces on my property, and the interaction between my plants in those horizontal and vertical spaces. And I want to make sure that they're pruned back and away from one another to minimize flames from hopscotching from one plant to the next. So a rule of thumb that I use is that, can I walk around my plant, and is there space between my plants? And if not, then I prune them back. But I also want people to understand that it's important to prune at the right time of the year. So, I mentioned that dead debris, you can prune anytime, but certain plants respond better if they're pruned at the right time of the year. And, if our listeners are not familiar with the type of plant that they have, we have a help desk, and they can take a photograph of the plant, and we can help to ID that plant and also offer advice on the right time of the year to prune that plant.
But the basic ongoing removing, dead branches, leaf material that's fallen on the ground, dead wood, that you should be able to do throughout the year. And that's sort of your fire smart preparation, is to get that flammable material out. Is that right?
Yeah, and again, it becomes a lifestyle habit, so to speak. And if, we're all busy. People have busy lives. And so even if you cannot do it throughout the year, if you can really focus on the critical months, when we have those hot, dry, windy days, that's, if you can only do it occasionally, that's really the time that we emphasize that level of maintenance.
So now, Faye, if I have a tree or a bush outside of the 5-foot zone away from the house, but the branches are extending into it, what should I be thinking of doing?
So when you look at the ground, you also have to look up. And
okay.
So, yeah, and so there's kind of this no-fly zone from the ground to well above the roof of your property, and that's where you really don't want to have any kind of combustible material either in the air or on the ground. So try to keep branches and limbs pruned back. It also helps just to minimize the plant litter from collecting in gutters and on the roof,
right,
if you do that. So again, this is where planning becomes really important, because you want to prune those plants and tree branches at the right time of the year. So for example, I have a redwood tree in my backyard, and I've already contacted my arborist to schedule a time to come out and prune in January. And I do that every couple of years. And I do that because January is the right time of the year to prune back those branches for the health of the tree.
So I hate to ask this, but are there situations where you should just take a tree or a shrub and move it because it's the wrong plant in the wrong place?
Yeah, so this is a real common occurrence with our more traditional landscapes that encouraged foundation plantings, right? So again, it depends. I think when you have to remove a significant portion of a tree or a bush to get it out of that 5-foot zone, it may be too severe
right,
for that plant to survive. If it's a young tree, or if it's a young plant that will become a bush, there's probably a good chance that you can carefully dig around the root structure and move it to another part of the garden where, again, it's a more appropriate location, given the sun, soil, irrigation. But I think that's why we always have this motto: right plant, right place.
right.
So it goes back to, if you're anxious to go to the nursery and pick up that tree or that beautiful native plant that will turn into a bush in time, just make sure you consider its mature size, so that when you do plant it, it is in the right place, and that 5, 6, 10 years from now you don't have to remove it.
So it seemed like on the Fire Smart website, the idea was you had low plants near the house, and then as you get 10, 20, 30 feet out, you kind of, it looked like you kind of stepped up in height. Is that correct?
Yeah, you know, another
Ideally, ideally. No.
ideally, and you know, another master gardener that I work with, we were talking about this, and she said, yeah, you know, it's kind of like a bowl effect. So if you can imagine your house in the center of that bowl, as the bowl continues to expand, you want to have your smaller plants closer to the house and your larger plants farther away. Now that is an ideal story, if you would, if you're planting from scratch.
Right.
You know, for those of us who have existing gardens, again, you know, just try to go out and look at your garden with fresh eyes and see how you might work towards that model.
Right. And I guess that the other part of the article that struck me as interesting is you've obviously thought a lot about irrigation in how to, even with native plants, and also things to protect against on a red flag day, and not deplete the water supply. So can you tell us how much is enough water? I know that's not a fair question, but I'm asked all the time, so I'm thrilled to be able to ask it to somebody else.
So Joe,
It depends.
again, that's my motto. It depends, right?
Okay.
So it depends on the plant. So, you know, native plants, and again, depending on which native, they want, in many cases, relatively dry soil. Fruit plants or any kind of edible plant is going to need, you know, more consistent moist soil, and yet plants like I have mostly succulents on my property, and even though succulents and things like natives are considered to be drought tolerant, they still need water from time to time. Right. And so right now it's spring, and you know, our soil is still relatively moist from the rains that we've had. The rains have you know, gone deep down into our soils. And so it really wasn't until last week that I actually turned on my irrigation system. But the way my irrigation system is set up is that I water infrequently, but when I water deep. Because I want the root structure to go, you know, deep. And my succulents don't like, you know, wet soil. And so, but they still need moisture. And so, so if you don't know how much your plants are being watered, one of the things I mentioned in my article was that you can take a weeding tool, for example, that has, you know, kind of a long, thin piece of metal, and you can drive that down into the soil, and then, you know, kind of old school method, stick your finger in and just see, you know, see how that soil feels on your fingertips. And then again, depending on what plant you have, then you can judge whether it's receiving the level of hydration that it needs.
So when you say deep watering, what you mean is a longer period. Turn the water on not that often, but for a longer period. So that
slow.
The water is allowed to seep into the ground.
Right, and it's a slow, you know, it's a slow drip. And if you have an irrigation system integrated into the property, you can control that with, you know, you can program that, you can control that with the controller. But for example, I have a Fuji apple tree in my backyard, and because of the way my irrigation is set up, it does not get the level of water that it needs, because it's you know, it's an edible. And so I just take the hose out, and I set the timer on my watch, and I just allow it to drip slowly, but I leave it on for like an hour.
Right.
Right. So it gets down deep into the soil.
So for people with street side plantings, you know, between concretes.
Mm-hmm.
This is something you should probably do once a month anyway, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of deep watering. So Fay, imagine that I raked, weeded, pruned, and irrigated. Would I be done?
So Joe, let me ask you a question. If you took a shower today, do you need to take it again tomorrow or the next day or the day after that?
Well, the correct question is, do you need to take another one tonight?
There you go. So I think they're just, like taking care of ourselves. There are some fundamentals to keep in mind in terms of maintenance. So keep your plants well hydrated, and especially do that throughout the extended hot summer months. And what I do is, until we get to those hot, dry, extended months, I keep my irrigation, systems basically set to low and infrequent. But then, change the programming
Right.
so that it meets the needs of your plants later in the year. And we really ask that you irrigate as normal and don't overwater on red flag days, because that depletes the water tanks that the fire departments rely on should a fire occur.
I remember reading that. Right. Yes.
Yeah. And then, clean up. So let's say you go out there and you're cleaning away dead debris. Don't leave it in a pile. Make sure there are great, kind of green, really light, kind of nylon green bins that the nurseries sell. And I carry one of those around with me, and no sooner do I cut, I just toss it directly in the bin, or I pull a weed, it goes directly in the bin. Sometimes I put a tarp down, and I just toss things over my shoulder, and then what I do is I take the tarp and I throw it into the green waste bin. By the way, speaking of green waste bins, make sure that you keep your green waste bin away from your home, because they're also flammable. And then limit what we call fuel continuity. And I think our listeners today, we're all going to start hearing this vocabulary more and more. And the idea is that you want to interrupt the path of the fire, from the property to your home. So you want to restrict a fire's ability to hopscotch across your property, either horizontally or vertically, from one plant to the next towards your home.
So, Fay, we have this wonderful video that you've done that we're going to end with. I want to thank you so much. And I know that there's a bunch of information at the Marin Master Gardener website. And also, and you can also, I think, get questions answered through the help desk. Is that correct?
Yes. And since we're still somewhat sheltered in place, the UC Cooperative Extension in Novato is not open, but and we're not taking calls over the phone, but we are answering questions through email.
Okay. So I would just Google Marin Master Gardeners and you can get all the contact information there. Do you want to explain briefly what this video is we're about to see?
Sure. And I also, we work very closely with Fire Safe Marin, because we recognize as Master Gardeners that we are not subject matter experts on fire. And the Fire Safe Marin also recognizes that they are not horticultural experts on gardening, and yet the two very much are complementary and go hand in hand. So the video that we created with Fire Safe Marin really focuses on the landscaping aspects of creating defensible space around the property. And one thing before I show the video that I'd really like to emphasize is that as our listeners are working on their vegetation management, that they really ensure that their evacuation routes are clear of vegetation, and that that's a big focus of their maintenance routine.
So I want to thank everyone. We're going to see this short video, then I'll sign off, but I want to thank everyone who's tuned in. The video will be posted on the Larkspur Library website for future reference. And there will be future interviews and classes on Saturday mornings going forward. Next Saturday, it's summer vegetable gardening, and it'll be at 11 o'clock. And I wanted to thank Fay so much. And Fay, if you want to start your video.
Sure. Thank you very much, Joe. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today for this great video, or great interview. You did a really nice job, Joe, so thank you for that.
Most improved.
All right. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen at this point.
Right.
And if for some reason the audio, if we have any problems, just let me know, okay?
Okie dokie.
All righty.
Thanks, Fay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Fay Mark from the University of California Marin Master Gardeners. Today I'm going to show you how to create and maintain a beautiful fire-smart landscape. Most traditional residential landscapes include foundation plantings and large trees and shrubs near the house. We're used to this look, but it turns out there are better ways of organizing your landscape that may help protect your home when a wildfire is burning nearby. We're often asked the question, what are the safest plants? Truth is, all plants burn. When it comes to fire-smart landscaping, it's much more important to consider where a plant is situated and how it is maintained than to assume some plants are better than others. The area within 5 feet of your house is the most critical. During a wildfire, embers can travel long distances. They tend to collect near the base of a home's exterior walls and will ignite anything that burns. To avoid that, we recommend minimizing anything that can burn in this area, including wood mulch and plants. This also means moving items like firewood, lumber, patio furniture, and garbage cans. Clearing this area of combustibles is like creating a force field that defends your home against fire. This is a whole new way to think about landscaping, since many of our homes have plantings right up against the walls and foundation. Just take it step by step. Start by removing plants in front of sliding glass doors or windows and remove any wood mulch. Next, focus on taller plants under eaves and vines climbing on your house. Low-growing or ground-hugging plants are less likely to cause a problem. Just be sure they're well-hydrated and free of dead or dry material. Beyond 5 feet from the house, it's all about maintenance. The goal is to create defensible space that acts as a buffer between your house and your garden. It means looking at your garden with slightly different eyes. First, you want to interrupt the path of a fire by creating horizontal and vertical spacing between plants. That sounds complicated, but it's really not. You can create horizontal space by adding stepping stones, paths, patios, or walls. Any non-combustible surface between plantings helps stop the path of a fire. They can be as simple as gravel paths or as complicated as a low stone wall. The idea is to think of your planting beds as clumps or islands, with non-combustible surfaces providing separation to keep a fire from spreading along the ground. Vertical spacing is about stopping fire ladders. Fire ladders are when fire from lower plants spreads to nearby taller plants. If you stroll through your garden, are there places where shrubs are close to low tree canopies? If so, try to create space between them. Limb up trees and keep shrubs pruned. It's an easy and important way of interrupting a fire's path. The density of plantings provides another clue about how a fire could travel through your garden. You want to have a little breathing space in your garden. Consider breaking up hedges and large swaths of uninterrupted plantings to stop fire in its tracks. Another good rule of thumb is to keep low-growing plants closer to the house and taller plants away from the house. Second, you want to reduce your garden's fuel load. This is a fancy way of saying keep your garden cleaned up. Anything that burns is fuel for a fire. Diseased, dried, or overgrown trees and shrubs have more fuel than well-pruned trees and shrubs. So do weeds, leaves, and pine needles in roof gutters, and debris that's gathered under decks. Keep things cleaned up to starve fire of fuel. As we like to say, don't be fuelish. Don't worry, you don't need to pick up every last leaf on the ground. Just be on the lookout for excess fuel, being extra vigilant the closer you are to your home or other built structures. Do you see plant material that would be useful for starting a campfire? If so, that's probably a good clue that it needs to be removed. Step into your garden and look up. Do you see tree branches near the roof line? Try to keep branches 10 feet from your roof or chimney, and definitely not touching the walls of your house. That way you'll avoid a buildup of needles and leaves on your roof and your rain gutters. Are there any diseased, dead, or dried shrubs or trees that need to be pruned or removed? Now look down. Are paths clear of debris? Do plants look healthy and hydrated? Plants that are properly hydrated are more resistant to fire and to pests and diseases. Even some drought-resistant plants may need a little supplemental water during extended dry periods. What about mulch? A layer of mulch improves soil quality, regulates soil temperature, reduces weeds, and helps retain water. Use non-combustible mulches like stone or gravel within 5 feet of any structure, including decks and sheds. Further out, choose larger, composted wood chips and avoid applying mulch greater than 2 inches deep. Now let's talk about choosing plants, a favorite topic for master gardeners. We recommend plants that don't need much water, are easy to maintain, and that contribute to the ecological health of the surrounding area. We also suggest avoiding plants that are messy or invasive, like ivy and pampas grass, meaning they grow or spread so fast it's hard to keep them under control. Remember, you're trying to reduce your fuel load. Start by assessing your garden's growing conditions, such as sun exposure and climate, and then select plants that thrive in that environment. In other words, choose the right plant for the right place. Don't worry, we have tools to help you with that. Just visit the UC Marin Master Gardener website to learn more. We even have plant lists that you can print and take to the nursery. We also have demonstration gardens where you can check out dozens of plants firsthand that are beautiful, colorful, and suitable for our Marin microclimates. Visit us at the Falkirk Cultural Center in San Rafael and at Harvey's Garden at Blackie's Pasture in Tiburon. That's it. Thanks for joining me, and congratulations on taking the first step towards creating a gorgeous, thriving, fire-smart landscape. Happy gardening!
Fay, on behalf of the Larkspur Library and the Commons Foundation, thank you so much. Tonight was wonderful. We hope that you come back again, and it's so good that you're doing this work around making our community safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Fay, and thanks, Joe. Don't forget, next week we have summer vegetables gardening. You can sign up at the Eventbrite. Check out the library's calendar. The links are there. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you, Fay and Joe. And you guys have a great weekend. So.
And Franklin, we did get one question, which is
the question was, somebody wanted to know, it was they wanted to watch your citrus presentation. I think you just did in Sausalito, but I know we had it on the calendar for us too.
The citrus presentation, I think, is on the Sausalito Library website, but we'll do it here in Larkspur soon. But again, I think Fay is much better at this. So thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful summer, and please be safe. Bye-bye.